and it let out this blood-curdling, guttural scream.
On the side of the road, he sees a deer carcass and something eating on it, which he thought was a bear. And as the lights hit it, it stood up. And, like, this gives me chills talking about it. He said it stood up and it had the face of a man.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Bigfoots of America podcast show. I'm your host, Bryan Sawyer, coming at you. This is episode 44. And today we are with Tim Vogel of the Cobble Mountain Critter Project. Tim is a team member with his brother, Eric, and they are friends with a wonderful friend of mine, Donna Copus. And like I told Tim backstage, hey, if he knows Donna and they're friends, that's good enough for me. So with all that said, we're going to go ahead and bring Tim in right now. Hey, Tim, you there?
Hi, everybody. Hi. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Thanks for taking the time to be on the show. I know I had to cancel last time. I had totally forgot. We've been so busy here in Michigan. What we do is we travel around, not only do the podcast show, but we do the Bigfoots of Michigan TV series here in Michigan as well. And so we travel all over the state of Michigan. Even we went and saw Donna, of course. We just got back from the South Carolina Bigfoot Festival. I was just out at another state game area last week. Multiple eyewitnesses, multiple encounters myself with Sasquatch. And sometime we'll have to talk about, I am one of the rare eyewitnesses of a fairy. And I never believed in fairies or anything like that. I would never even have thought about a fairy or have it come across my radar until one was right in front of my face. So that gives you a little bit of information about me, Tim. But let's jump to you and the Cobble Mountain Critter Project. Let's talk about you and your brother and how you got started and how this is, just kind of climaxing. You said you are now doing something called the Youth Outdoor Ed. So let's talk about all that. Go ahead.
All right. So Eric and I have been investigators for Bigfoot since 2013, actively, kind of putting together or working with groups. And that started after an encounter that we had that we'll get into after. But that's pretty much where it came from. We started there in 2013 and went through a progression of meeting people in different groups. And then we started working with different groups along the way. And 15 years later, we're on our own as the Vogel Brothers, and we're doing research locally here in Western Mass, that's where we're from. I'm up here in Russell, Massachusetts, and it's an area that has a lot of activity for Bigfoot, and it has a rich history of Bigfoot. We have lots of local reports and things like that. So we're happy and content right here learning about Bigfoot in Western Mass and New England because there's so much that hasn't even been reported yet. We're just kind of breaking the iceberg, chipping away at it because people are starting to get comfortable with talking about it.
Awesome. I think like one of the things you said that struck me is I've been thinking about this phrase lately, and it's not that they exist is the crazy part. It's that there's so many of them. That myth, that idea about them only being in the Northwest Territories or out there in California because of the Patterson-Gimlin sighting, that in itself is a myth. Yeah, there's so many more of these things. Could you talk about that for a minute?
Well, with the groups that I've been associated with, and the ones you see online, that come up with these kind of calibrated or numbered report areas, and they kind of sort of show you a graph of where all these reports are. That's probably fairly accurate as far as what I've seen in the past. I worked with the BFRO with my brother Eric, and we were the team from Massachusetts along with a number of other folks. And when we did that, we saw a lot of things. And as far as information and reports go, so as far as who gets more, this, that, or the other thing, it's really kind of, there's no science to it. There's a habitat, I think. There's an ecosystem. There's no science, why they're there. It's their ecosystem, and that's why they're there. So it's rich and diverse on either coast. And somewhere in the South, it's pretty good and pretty heavy. And in the Midwest, it kind of looks kind of open. That may all be because of resources, be it water or whatever else, pressure or anything. For me, I believe we are active from the spring right up until snowfall, and that's when we start to get our calls. Eric and I have, with our group, the Cobble Mountain Critter Project, we have these little hang boxes, the little wooden mailboxes we put up in like the Beckett General Store, and that's the Western Mass Bigfoot Reporting Center. And the locals love it. We go up there, every 3 or 4 months maybe, and have coffee, and we sit down, we bring some casts with us, and we talk Bigfoot. And we kind of become part of the community. We just finished with the police department here in Russell, Mass, the Trunk or Treat, which was a 2-day event, and we were the Cobble Mountain Critter. So, the critter was down there with Bigfoot and whatnot. So that was fun. So getting involved in things like that gives you access to the community lighten up, and they talk.
Awesome. Is that one of your goals? I know it is for me here in Michigan, is really just to bring the community together and bring out awareness about Bigfoot. I always use this example. I've got 2 sons. My youngest son, what a great boy. He pretty much believes whatever I say. But my oldest son, he just kind of laughs his head and shakes it and says, Dad, you just believe in Bigfoot because you're getting older, getting ready to retire, and you're looking for something to do. And he's a guy who's out there quadding all the time in the woods. And
Right.
so what I tell him is, well, look, his name's Dakota. I'm like, Dakota, all I want is for you guys to have this in the back of your mind, because me personally, I've come across some eyewitnesses who were scared to death when they had their unexpected encounters. A friend of mine now, Aaron Young, he was so shaken he hadn't been back to the location where he eyewitnessed a Sasquatch for about 40 years. And even when we went back to that spot and we filmed him, he had PTSD. Every twig snap, any kind of wind blowing, branches, whatever, he was, just kind of freaking out a little bit and looking around. What have been some of your eyewitness encounters that you've had there in Massachusetts?
Well, I've had my most recent was just the other day, actually. And Eric and I were driving down. So if they're up in Lanesboro, Pittsfield area, we were on Balance Rock Road at Balance Rock State Park. We were driving past the parking lot, and we'd been past there 100 times. Nothing, it's a gravel parking lot. There's a creek that comes out under the road as a culvert. There's some pine tree, there's some deciduous, a little grove of trees that kind of maybe it follows the riparian zone of the creek, that little along the edge. And it's really dense, really thick with cattails, goldenrod, 4 or 5 foot tall flowers, things like that kind of stuff that's already going to seed. So everything was this tannish color, and the trees were into a yellow phase, kind of, going into autumn. It's up here in Russell, Mass, so it's 3rd, 4th week of October. So the colors are just past peak or losing it. And like I said, we'd been past this thing a number of times, and all of a sudden I'm looking over at the parking lot, and I kind of smiled at Eric, and I says, "Hey, dude, either somebody just put a Bigfoot silhouette, because I have them here in my camp, either a Bigfoot silhouette and it turned its head, or I just saw a Bigfoot in that parking lot. And so we whipped it around, and we were in his truck. There was a poor kid on a bike. He's a guy on his bike, and we just whipped it around. He thought we were probably going to come get him or something, because he just freaked out. He's a little, guy on his bike driving down the road, and all of a sudden his truck wings it around. He's all freaked. But this bike had also just passed that same area that we did. It was going in the same direction. So long story short, we drove back and there's nothing there. And I told him, I says, this thing here just looked like it was a black silhouette, just like all the other cutouts you have, and except this one turned its head. And that's what caught my attention as we drove by it. And it was as big, I'm going to say 8-9 feet high, probably 4 or 5 feet wide. It would look like a big silhouette is what it looked like. And because I wasn't waiting for it, I didn't expect it. And, boom, it was in front of me, and then it wasn't, because you're traveling down the road. And that's what I saw. So we turned around, went back, and there was absolutely nothing there. And so that kind of really, I think I just had a roadside encounter, like what everybody reports to me. Well, it was there for a minute, it was that brief, and there it was. I know what I saw. I've seen them 100 times. I've got them here in my camp. I'm a ranger at a Boy Scout camp. We've got Bigfoots all over in camp. So I've made half of them, so I know what they look like. And this looks like someone put a Bigfoot up on a tree. And as I drove by, I didn't think twice about it. And then it moved its head, like it looked at the truck when it went past. That's what caught my attention, not so much the silhouette, but that movement. And so sure enough, just the other day, last week, Lanesboro, Balance Rock Road. If you're there, get out there, man. There's something there. It was raining that day, and it was so thick with Mount Laurel and prickers. I didn't want to. It was over my head. That's how tall. Maybe some Phragmites and stuff. I wasn't going to go carousing through there, and not even be able to see where I'm going with an 8-9 foot tall thing that may or may not be so friendly. So it never got to that. We went back the next day. Actually, I went back with my wife. She sat in the car. I went through the woods, and we found some, maybe what would have been a trackway, but it was more the goldenrod and the Phragmite that was bent down. And so, your foot displacement is now spread over, a 4-foot flower, stem, and it doesn't sink in so well. So I didn't get much of a track per se, but you could see where something walked out of the woods, and it certainly went, from where I was looking and saw this thing through the woods and through this kind of a meadow, and it continued off. So, and it has a huge history of it. So that's the first sighting, or my recent sighting. And I couldn't tell you much more than it was black. It was really large, and it turned its head and looked at the truck. So it's a really cool experience for me. Number one, I got to see it fairly close, even though it was fast. And I got to experience what other people experience when they try to tell me, well, dude, I was just driving by and it was there, and, I saw it for a second or two and it was gone. By the time I made up what it was, we already passed it. You're going 45 miles an hour, and it's gone. I'm in New England. It's all woods or, trees and whatnot. It wasn't necessarily all farmland. So this thing is gone in a heartbeat. And had an experience with my wife back in July of 23. We were driving through the Cobble Mountain Reservoir. And that's a place where it's managed. You can't get out of your truck. You can't stop. You can't, there's no trespassing around the reservoir. And it encompasses 3 towns, almost 4. It's a huge body of water, and it's got a large land mass that encompasses. It's private. You don't have access. I'm on a camp that has 1,300 acres, and we abut that property. And then that abuts this state forest and that state forest, and it just goes on and on and on and on. So it's just a huge greenway out here. And, it's dotted with these little country towns, little farms and things like that. So that's why I think a Bigfoot up here, it would make it successfully without having to dodge too many people. There's a lot of woods out here in Western Mass and even in Central Mass, going up through the Brookfields, through Pittsburgh and stuff. There's still a lot of woods out there. So yeah, it's definitely a great place for the activity. And now people are, like I said, kind of loosening up and reporting this stuff, calling up and saying, hey, I saw this, or So we'll do our library talk tomorrow night in Agawam. If you're out there, watch it. And,
Awesome.
Come ask questions. But it's always fun because after the library is when the folks usually come in the parking lot, and that's where the locals say, hey, you know what? Over here I had this, and over here this happened. They didn't really want to come up and say nothing in the library, but in the parking lot, they want to get your story out before you leave. Or so we just give everybody, as they come in, they're going to get a business card, and it's going to automatically, if you got your report, you don't want to talk about it now, that's fine. We're patient, we'll wait, but we certainly want to hear your story. And that's the whole premise of this stuff, like I said, the few bucks that we do make goes into youth outdoor ed. So it's, we're not traveling around the world and we're not making money or anything like this. It's research and education. One of the things.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
With so here in Michigan, I just heard a national report that we're like number 5 with Bigfoot sightings and encounters and all of that. We have something here called the Upper Peninsula, and that to me is a game changer where only 4% of our population, human population, live up there. And so it's very rural, very dense forest. And so many encounters up there. So if I look at all the encounters in Michigan with all the eyewitnesses I've talked to here, they have seen multiple different types of Sasquatch. What blows my mind are the white ones. Of course, we have the black ones, we have the brown ones, we have like the Carhartt reddish colored ones, and then we have gray ones, which I assume are the elders. And then there's been a couple of white ones up in Newberry,
Right.
Michigan. Yeah, Newberry, Michigan, which is in the UP. Someone saw a white one and a black one together. But with that said, have you heard like different type? Because I kind of think they're like dog breeds. We have so many different types of dog breeds. Why not different types of Sasquatch? What are your thoughts on that?
Right.
And what kinds have you heard of there in Massachusetts?
Well, my wife and I, the Cobble Mountain Critter one, that was the one I was just talking about. We stopped at the reservoir. We looked across the reservoir. My wife actually saw it. She saw a large white object. We were just out there today. There's a drought, and the water line comes from the trees down 60 to 100 feet, maybe more. And so there's a very flat transition. There's no trees, it's rocks or sand or mud. It's a riverbank transition down to the water line. So tree line to water line. And she saw this large white thing at the tree line, and she thought it was a sign. And she said, what's that? We never said that before. This is in July. Everything is either green or it's the water and then the sky. So white would stick out like a sore thumb. And it did. And so she saw it, and I'm on a lake now. The shoreline is a half mile, almost 3/4 of a mile away, right out the window. And I can see people that will walk ice fishing or something or kayaking right on the shoreline. And I can see them. I can't make out their face, but I can see them. So, this thing here walked out of the tree line and down. This is a white one, by the way. It comes out of the tree line, walks down to the water, bends over, gets a drink of water, and then goes back to the tree line. And, so everybody says, well, that could have been just about anything, really, that could have been anything. And I'm like, first off, it didn't look right. This thing, if it was a bear or if it was an albino moose or a deer or something like that, they're out there. But this didn't ever give us a profile shot. I'm going to use my camera here. This is the Bigfoot, right? Or the white Bigfoot, this edge right here. It literally came out of the water or out of the tree line, down to the water and drank, got up and walked back into the woods. It never turned around after it got a drink like a deer would have or a bear and turned around and walked back to the woods. There was never that profile of whatever animal it was. It simply came out of the woods, got a drink, and walked back to the woods. So there was never a profile shot, if you follow what I'm trying to get across. We never had the side profile of any other animal. this thing walked out and it bent over and got up and came back. So my wife got to see that. And that was cool because this is many, many years of us Bigfooting and her calling us wacky and this and that, oh boy, spending money again or this or that, or say,
Oh, sure.
So it was one of those things where she actually spotted it, brought it to my attention. We sat there and watched it till it walked back into the woods, and then it was gone. And so then we started, driving off to see if we could maybe come across it on a dirt road, but there's really no access to it. And if you stop, the state police will be there, or the water supply police will be there, whoever it is will be there. So there was that one as well. We had a BFRO. I worked with the BFRO, me and Eric. We worked with the Bigfoot Field Research Organization for 10, 11, 12 years or so. And we did Massachusetts reports, and, we had access to helping others throughout New England and beyond if we needed to. And we led expeditions for those guys. And we had a number of successful expeditions where we had Class A visuals while we were out on expedition. And that was with multiple witnesses, multiple, people see them, or they'll have wood knocks or whoops, things like that. We did it with Squatchachusetts, another team that's out here. And we're doing it right now with another group from the Bridgewater Triangle, the Boots on the Ground group up there. They're out weekly investigating, and they do it live. The Banter with Richie B podcast and Wojo, they get out there and they're Bigfooting live. You're seeing what they're seeing, Bigfooting. And we do a lot of analyzing and stuff like that. They'll have questions of prints or this or that. They'll send us a lot of information back that they want to try to identify or this or whatnot. Like I said, Eric and I have been guides for pretty much all our life and had an outdoor business for 20 years that we retired. And I'm currently a ranger. Yeah. So I'm hoping,
Awesome.
I live in the woods. I'm 3/4 of a mile away from my mailbox. So I got a long driveway. And
I got to admit, I'm a little bit jealous. I put in to be a ranger part-time here in Michigan because, I'm going to be retiring from, being a grunt here at Ford Motor Company, an auto worker. And I'm like, I wouldn't mind being a ranger because I think part of the reason I fell in love with the whole Bigfoot thing was not only is it a strange phenomenon, I spent my life working since I was 14 and the last 31 years in these huge auto plants up here that are nothing but steel and concrete with no windows. And I got out into the woods doing this. How I got started, I'm also, as a hobby, I'm an actor here in Michigan. And then I got out into the woods filming pilot TV shows. And that's how I stumbled into all of this about 3-4 years ago. And then I fell in love with the woods. And then I just started meeting people. I met that Aaron Young, first of all. And then I just fell in love with it. And I can I can definitely back you up in the sense that I was fortunate because my girlfriend was the one who heard and saw Bigfoot before I did. And so that paved the way for me to
it's
do all
easy
this
sell
stuff.
now. Yeah, the
Exactly.
unicorn
Not,
exists.
exactly. Of not like, where are you going again?
Mhm.
Well, whatever, and then they're embarrassed to tell their friends or family that you're all into Bigfoot. No, she's like, oh my gosh, they exist and this happened and that happened.
Yeah. In fact, we
So,
were just down in Pennsylvania. A friend of ours down there has the Pennsylvania Bigfoot Research Organization, Craig Paulson. And we were down there back in September, and he had a camp out, and there was a number of people that showed up from around the area. And within the group, they pulled up a cast, they casted a track, Levon casted a track, and they brought to our attention the first night was eye shine, or rather eye glow, not eye shine. I'm correcting. They use the term eye glow, and now it makes perfect sense as opposed to the eye shine. Eye shine is when you flip your light out there and you get a deer's reflection.
yep.
You get eye shine, you get something shining back. This was completely emitted by itself out there to us with no one looking except with your own eyes. So Kim got to see that with her own. We were out there. We heard a noise. We were all kind of sitting around the campfire, and we heard a noise. We got up and we went to check it out. And this was on the second night. They had already, put this, investigated the area the night before. And when we went out the following night, we saw, the eye glow. There was white eye glow. There was multiple sets at different levels. A couple of them turned red, from white to red. And,
oh, really?
Yeah.
I heard that might have to do with like hesitation or anger, or like if they feel threatened. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it coincided with us talking to them. We were sitting on the edge of this dirt road, or edge of the road, and there's, in the state forest, there's nothing back there. There's just nothing back there. And these lights are within 100 yards. It's deep woods, so it's hard to tell just how far they are. But within 60 to 100 yards, maybe 120 yards, are these lights that are in the woods. And as we were talking to them, they were getting brighter, and then they would get dimmer. We walked in one direction, these lights followed us, and they moved, like they were looking at each other and blinked, and one of the white ones, they may have moved in different places, but it turned red a couple times. There was a weird green streak that just kind of looked like a firefly, that just was maybe like a glow stick. Like somebody took a glow stick in front of you and just went with a glow stick. You had this green tracer thing. That's kind of what it looked like. And that was within the woods, but between us. It was just this weird, and only 2-3 people saw that. So out of maybe 6 or 7 saw the glow of that green streak. But everybody was witnessing this eye glow back in the woods. And so it went into multicolors. It went bright to dim, and it turned and faced each other. It responded to voices. So meaning the eye glow got brighter and it got dimmer. And as we walked down the road, it walked down the road, and then it went back. And we did that till it stopped. And then eventually, we left the area to see if we could get them to do something else, see if something else would happen maybe. And nothing really happened. We had an established campsite for the weekend already going. This was happening not too far from that. So they weren't afraid or, disturbed of this presence. It was in a campground. They really were the only ones there. There was some, truckers doing haul shots down in the woods out in the, on the main road out, a few miles away maybe ish. And that's what they would come in. But really it was no one where we were. So that was eye shine, which was the first time in almost 20 years of Bigfooting that I actually got to witness that. That was pretty neat. That was something I hadn't seen before, and it was clearly emitting its own light. There was no lights in our group, like with a light you'd see a beam, or if there's somebody in the woods, they would have a beam. Nothing like that. This had nothing like that. It was weird.
Fantastic. I know I've got 2 eyewitnesses here, a married couple. And they are like, I've heard it before, but with them, I'm friends with them now. That same type of deal, they said it was almost like flashlights coming out of their eyes. And then yours, oh my gosh, that's a cherry on the top, where they basically, the eye shine responded, or self-illuminating eyes responded to your interaction with them.
Yeah.
Now, I was down in South Carolina. I was with the NCI team. They're the North Carolina investigators. They took me up on a mountain down there, right by Westminster, South Carolina, kind of on the border of South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia. We went up there. Now, here's I'm still learning. You guys have been doing this for years. This is my 3rd year, so I'm still learning. We saw blue eye shine. So we had white, we had yellow, and then blue eye shine. Have you ever heard of Sasquatch having blue eye shine before? I've only heard it one other time. A guy by the name of Ernie Davio. There was a study out there, or some kind of investigation out there. that there could be a connection to Neanderthals or Denisovans. I'm not sure which tribe of the Neanderthal type tribe, but they were supposed to have blue eyes. So there could be a connection. Have you ever heard of blue eye shine with Bigfoot?
I've never experienced it, but a very good friend of mine, Ernie Davro, has. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, good. He's a good friend of yours.
yeah, where Ernie's experience was on Drake Mountain in Granville, Mass, is just a stone's throw. It's a couple miles away as the crows fly. Literally just over the reservoir is where he had his experience. I'm on this side of the reservoir, the Cobble Mountain Reservoir. So he got to experience the Cobble Mountain the critter firsthand, right in your face. And if you know his story, it was a 5-foot encounter.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he had a
Amen.
shotgun on it. Yeah, he was going to shoot it until this thing said, hey, right?
Yep,
yeah,
yep.
exactly. So that automatically put it in Ernie's head that this was some sort of, it was communicating in some fashion. And Ernie's a bright guy. He's, military, a common sense kind of guy. And, when you're pointing a gun at somebody and they have the ability to go like this, something is, there's some sort of response, something should trigger within you and him. And it did. So Ernie, after a bit dropped his firearm and had a 5-foot encounter. And he'll be the first one to tell you there's blue eyes in Bigfoot. Bigfoot will have blue eyes. And to have
cool.
a 5-foot encounter, Ernie's Bigfoot had blue eyes. Now, does it reflect blue? I have no idea. I don't know how to answer that. I don't know of any critters that do reflect blue, but in the same story, you could be talking paranormal, a Bigfoot that isn't just flesh and blood like a lot of us want to believe. There's a whole lot of other people that want to believe it's paranormal. And could blue eyes and eye shine be a part of that? Absolutely. I couldn't. Right. I'm not going to put limits on what is potentially out there. People are seeing weird stuff. Yeah. My buddy's out in the Bridgewater Triangle just witnessed a whole bunch of flickering lights, and it was just so random in the middle of nowhere. I don't know. It's just bizarre. Stuff happens, and if you're lucky enough to catch it, and they do, they get it live. So you're Bigfooting with them live. So they've got it live. So people see weird stuff, and you can't just you can't kick it to the curb. Once you've seen Bigfoot and the unicorn exists, people talk about Dogman. I don't even want to go there. No, who the heck wants to go there? But really, I got good friends that have seen this thing right here in Worthington. We've got a woman that made a report. My brother Eric went up, and it started off as a Bigfoot report. And so they're on the front porch having coffee, and they're recording this. And he's like, this sounds too demonic for Bigfoot. This is just kind of out there for Bigfoot, out of the norm for what we typically hear in a Bigfoot story. This had some weird notes to it, so to speak. And he says, has this place ever been like haunted? Is this an area that's had a lot of death or something? Or I don't know, anything like that. And she said, well, come to think of it, the lot next door was a tuberculosis center back in the early 1900s or 1800s. And that's where they used to come up and, heal up in the mountains up here in Worthington. And so there was a lot of death per se up there. And so that might have been attached to the property, maybe. And what she's experiencing after the Bigfoot report, her husband started talking about a Bigfoot that had an extended face, more like a Dogman report. And up here, there's also what we got, the Wendigo, which is our Bigfoot history. And a Wendigo could be a shapeshifter. And it could be a multiple of different things at different times. So, it's out there. You can make a great movie out of this. Somebody could. But people are talking about seeing this with their own eyes. Now, Kimberly and I saw this white Bigfoot. They can call us crazy all we want, but we know what we saw. These people are going to sit in their kitchen and tell you they know what they saw. as serious as we are, and as you are, and as they are. So you can't just blow it off. There is weird stuff out there. And just because you can't wrap your head around it doesn't mean the dude is lying. It just means you don't understand.
Oh, for
You're
sure.
trying to wrap your head around something that may or may not exist.
Oh, exactly. I mean, yeah, the pastor of the church that I was attending, well, this has been 2, 3 years now. He gets a hold of me, broad daylight dogman sighting in his church parking lot by the guy who cuts his church lawn. That's in Carroll, Michigan, just down the street from me. So that was another reason I got started. Just seemed to be the domino effect. And then I'll tell you right now, Tim, if I wouldn't have had the fairy sighting, it's like I tell everybody. I had a fairy sighting. I have 2 boys. Okay. I was a single dad raising 2 boys. We don't sit around and watch Peter Pan and Tinkerbell. That's not on my radar. So
Right.
when a fairy appears in front of my face and talks to me, Tim, and I'm wide awake when this happens. I'm
Yeah.
not sleeping. I'm not dreaming. I'm not in that land in between awake and sleeping. Boom, there it is. And it's a bluish gray tint and it interacts with me and I interact with it. And I think if I wouldn't have had that fairy sighting, and this sounds terrible, I might have been more judgmental when it comes to Sasquatch. But now I'm like,
Yeah.
everything's on the
Yeah.
table. If you want to tell me your Bigfoot came, and I always joke about this, your Bigfoot came from the third moon on the west side of the fifth ring of Saturn, let me hear it. I want to
Yeah.
hear it because we really, and no one really does, in my opinion, know exactly what these things are. Yeah, they could be an ancient human tribe.
Could
You
be.
listen to Donna Copus's and the Sasquatch, the female Sasquatch that was kind of on her deathbed in that cave,
Right.
was so human-like, or the Ernie Davio, they're so human-like, you cannot deny they are at least part human or some kind of hybrid.
They refer to them as forest people as opposed to a creature or something else. Ernie will always call it a forest people, and at least now he does. And he firmly believes he had an interaction where they communicated. That's just something you feel. There had to be a pretty intimate moment for Ernie at that moment, having this thing walking up to him.
Yep.
It just has to blow him away. So,
Oh
anyways,
yeah.
it's something that he feels very strongly he had was a communication moment, and it's something to look in a little deeper. And how do you do that? You hope somebody has an encounter that says, "Hey, wait, come here, let's chat." Let's talk like we do. Let's talk Bigfoot.
Yep.
So, anyways, it's probably not going to happen like that. So, what it's going to happen like is encounters like Ernie, where he had something come up and interact. So, we need
Yep.
more people to come up that are kind of being a little more comfortable with Bigfoot and the awareness that people are putting out there and how more commonplace it is for people to talk about it. And when they'll start opening up and you'll hear more of these really, I believe, pretty wild encounters where there's been more communication involved. We just haven't connected all the dots, we just, it's still out there in the big picture. And it takes communication, people like you, to gather researchers together and then kind of bring that scope of information to a place that people can reach out and gather it. We don't have that yet. There's a lot of great researchers out there throughout the country that have great information, legit stuff, and there's nowhere to share it except in a few places that may or may not let you in or may not let you share it or this or that, or it's just
Right.
put out, it's just BS or it's AI. And, hey, if you're going to be in the Bigfoot business for trying to get Bigfoot out, education and awareness, and you're trying to promote something that doesn't exist in most people's eyes, get ready to take your lumps. Simple as that.
Yeah.
It should be
Yeah.
fun. Make it fun.
Yep. Yeah, I'm careful with what I say to certain people, but I'm a guy who's had the mind speak. And so you say Ernie Davio caused them forest people. That was the mind spoke or speak, whatever you want to call it, that I received. I was out with long story short, I was out with an eyewitness. I was at a known Sasquatch sighting area. The eyewitness left me. At that time, I had been gifting a lot and I heard a grunt. I set my camera down, panned it real quick, and I caught an individual that I call Scout. And the reason I call him Scout because it was only that night or then one of the few nights after that, I was walking. I live in a place called Sandusky, Michigan, which is like the Hobbit Shire. This town is in the middle of nowhere. No one's coming to this location. It's off the beaten path. Everybody else heads up north on I-75 corridor. So this thumb area is just this desolate. Well, we shouldn't call it desolate. It's beautiful farmland. There's some rolling hills here, and I live like smack dab in the middle of that.
Yeah.
And I found out later there were more Sasquatch around me. But I'm coming after I caught this one on camera. I'm coming out of my backyard, and it's nighttime, Tim. And I hear, and my mind's totally clear. I got the garbage slung over my shoulder. I'm heading to out behind my detached garage where the garbage cans are into darkness. As soon as I get out of the porch light range and I'm stepping into darkness, I hear something in my head say three things. And it was very much Native American like broken English. I hear three things, Tim. I hear thanks for friendship, like thanks for friendship. Then I hear the word scout or the name scout, and then I hear forest people. I hear this all in my head. I don't know if the thing was standing just in the darkness or what, but I knew right then that it could have been that Sasquatch I saw because I was gifting. So they're saying, thanks for friendship. Thanks for gifting. I'd asked them once I heard them. I'm like, what's your name? I heard that was something to ask. So he replied, Scout is my name. And then he replied, we'd rather be called forest people than Bigfoot. Now, like the fairy sighting, I was wide awake. I will take that to my grave that happened. I don't care if anyone else in this world believes it. That's what happened. That's part of my story. So, yeah, like you said, if they end up being some kind of gigantopithecus that are just maybe tapping into the brain a little bit more than we have, and they've acclimated themselves with cloaking or whatever to be hidden in the forest, man, come on. They're out there all the time. A witness of mine said she had to have walked right by it and didn't know it was there because she thought it was a tree, just kind of a mossy tree. So, yes, like you were saying with communication, be open to what other people have to say. Be aware. And then that's when, like you're saying, we start collecting the data and we can start pulling all that data. And then when people have had some more traumatic encounters, we're able to help them and talk them down. Like, hey, man, the thing didn't kill you. I'm not saying some won't kill you.
Right? Never know.
I'm just saying there's so much information out there, and I get so excited when I start talking to people. So yeah, I didn't mean to take over your episode.
No.
But it is a fun, and so I try to be respectful to those who have been scared to death with these things, but then also, like you're saying, try to keep it serious, but also keep it fun and lighthearted as much as possible.
Yeah, especially if you're in a public eye with it, or kind of. I get trying to say that I've been there, done that, and people look at you and say, "Yeah, okay." Especially in a professional field, here I am with a bunch of other, professionals, and I'm the guy who's seen the Bigfoot, and I'll be the first one to have a 2-hour talk on Bigfoot, and I'll have forestry, wildlife, all kinds of people, and we just did a summer camp. I had a group that does nothing but that. They're forestry and fish and wildlife people. And we did a 2-hour Bigfoot presentation, and they walked away kind of blown away at what we had to say in our encounter and other people's encounters locally. So they're out there. I think people are just kind of they want to hear. I think the TV shows that have been out, Finding Bigfoot, which was a real big success, Expedition Bigfoot, big success, and it puts a lot of people, the Bigfoot in a different light. Now it's more of a pop icon, pop culture prima donna. It's out there everywhere. Everything's Bigfoot. Not everything, but there's a lot of Bigfoot stuff out there.
Oh, sure.
Businesses are themed, merch, all that stuff. So there's a lot of stuff. So it's becoming easier and acceptable to talk about Bigfoot, or at least listen to a podcast now and start lurking around on the podcast. So, you watch this podcast, go to the next podcast, go to the next podcast. And if you've had an experience and these guys are talking about what happened to you, it probably happened to you and you probably had a Bigfoot experience. Doesn't mean everything is Bigfoot. We get all kinds of reports and some, want it to be Bigfoot, but it doesn't pass the mustard. It just doesn't cut it. But, you tell people to be diligent, keep looking, they heard wood knock or this or that. That's awesome. I can't go out in the woods and prove there was a wood knock, so I'm not going to travel miles to a wood knock site, but we're going to talk about it. We're going to, what's the environment in that area? Was there apple orchards, fields, streams, acorns? What's necessarily there? Why would a Bigfoot be there potentially in that area? So, not just ask the question, but what's the resources? Why would it be there? What's the geology, terrain look like? Is it a trap? Is it something like that, like a place where you're going to pinch point, something like that. Something other, it could be the only watering hole in an area, and you're going to draw animals, and maybe this Bigfoot would know that, and that's why it would be there, to ambush an animal potentially. But who knows? So there's all kinds of fun. The investigative pieces are why it keeps me interested in, because not everything is a Bigfoot, but people are hearing these things. Something's making the noises, so I don't know, and you talked briefly on that, the woo, the paranormal aspect of Bigfoot. That may be why these things only leave a couple of tracks. Eric and I have only been privy to a handful of tracks where Bigfoot left. One we had in October Mountain State Forest left 6 tracks in the grass. 2 are castable, 1 was usable, and it shows toes that articulate, kind of like my fingers there. Shows you the toes on uneven ground, and the cast is straight across, but you see how the toes go down, and they're balancing him on this hillside. And there's a dozen witnesses to that one too. So it's kind of neat when you get all these different things, but there's only 2 tracks. Why did an 800-pound animal only leave 2 castable tracks? Why didn't it leave dozens? At the end of this story, it turned into an orb potentially, and this orb disappeared. So maybe this.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I'll tell you what, instead of leaving you hanging, we'll just go there. It was a BFRO expedition, 2018, I believe. And it's up here at October Mountain State Forest. Has a huge history of Bigfoot and other things. And we're out there. It's midnight plus, 1 o'clock in the morning. It's been raining, and it's drizzly rain that night. We've got TK scouts. We've got flares and some other personal night vision and whatnot. Within the group, there's 12, 14 people there. And we're on this shoreline, a mowed, like a park shoreline, kind of. There's no park. It's in the middle of the forest. But the rangers come up and they mow it, and it's kind of nice. You can go fishing and whatnot. And 100 yards away, it was 100 yards because we went back the following day with a rangefinder. But across the way from where we were, it's raining. It's nighttime. Our buddy Chuck says, "Hey, do you guys smell that?" And it was the first time we had really recognized or it was brought awareness to this smell that was obviously evident. We just thought it was more the swamp, but it really wasn't. Right around that time, we started, the guys with the flares started seeing what we called this pacing Bigfoot. And literally this thing was pacing back and forth. Through the flare, you could see a body walking. The flare, when it was recorded, because of the rain, the drizzle, and being 100 yards out, the pixelization was just too much. It was way too much distortion to have it put out on live and say, hey, look at this. This is a Bigfoot. And, have people say, yeah, okay there, buddy. It just didn't look right with the rain and the pixelization and maxing it out at 100 yards. But when you were looking at it, you could clearly see this thing was pacing. There had been a 90, 100-foot ash tree that had fallen. And this thing was on top of the ash log, and it was pacing back and forth. And it did it a half a dozen times until it eventually walked off of the tree and disappeared into the woods. We thought it was over. That whole thing transition was maybe a couple of minutes long that we were watching this thing go back and forth. And it jumped off a log, I guess, and it disappeared into the woods. And we thought we were done. And that was it. And then all of a sudden, at the end of this, what looked like to be a peninsula, but really it's just a bend in the pond. But where we're standing, it looks like a peninsula. And there's a pine tree. And this is a 100-foot pine tree for the sake of argument. Halfway up this pine tree, poof, this glow ball pops on. And it's this crystal blue glow ball. Literally, it's crystal blue, size of a beach ball, maybe bigger. And it pops on 50 feet up right in the middle of that white pine tree. It's just boom, like somebody flipped on a switch and there's this light in the middle of the forest right there. And boom. So this crystal blue ball pops on and it sits there and we're all looking at it astonished, picking our jaws up. So what the heck is this? And then all of a sudden it starts floating up the tree and it's a pine tree. And this thing never deviated around branches or anything. It just simply went up the whole beam of the tree. And then when it got to the very top of the tree, it went 3 or 4 seconds right along the tops of the trees and then poof, disappeared. So this potential Bigfoot that we seen disappeared moments later. This orb shows up in the same location the Bigfoot disappeared, and then it takes off. You call it what you want. Coincidence? Okay, that's fine. But they were together in the same story within moments of each other. So, if somebody was to tell me that, I'd say, well, yeah, okay, yeah, it could have been anything, fog. No, dude, this was a glow ball. It was no this was like glowing from inside of it. It never deviated around the branches. So whatever it did, it went through the branches. That was a trip. It was a trip. And we were all astonished looking at each other, kind of blown away at what we just saw. And it was a pretty neat experience. You go out with the hope and the intent to possibly show these people a Bigfoot or have a Bigfoot encounter or experience, and lo and behold, you have one. And there it is, and the crescendo was some blue orb. It was wild. And that was October Mountain right here, just down the road from where we are.
Oh my goodness. So you're saying that there's a possibility that Bigfoot can turn into orbs and back? Something like that?
That might be a possibility why you only get a couple of tracks. People see them and then they go back and they look for tracks. There's no tracks. Or these tracks disappear in a snow line and poof, they're gone. Well, how does that happen? Where do the tracks go? Why did it disappear? The substrate doesn't change. You're getting an 1.5 to 2-inch deep track and all of a sudden you're not. Where did it go? Something 800 pounds is going to leave that track in a substrate until the substrate changes and gets more dense.
I got to send you a picture then, because I've got some landowners near me, and they have claimed that as well, that they do believe, because they have a really unique area. We think it may have been an ancient Native American settlement at one time. There's a natural spring-fed pond there. I call it the Garden of Eden. And I was there. Well, first of all, I've heard on recording by the landowner the Sierra Sound type howls and all of that, and them talking back and forth. I went out there and I personally heard the samurai chatter, and they have multiple pictures of orbs on their property. And one in particular, this orb is like a mini ball of sun, like the sun, but it's just, small. And Yeah, so oh my goodness. Yeah, no, I needed to hear that because it's like, okay, maybe they're right. Because when people first
Yeah.
tell you this, you want to stick to the Gigantopithecus narrative. You want to switch to the Neanderthal narrative. But we've got to open our mind up and say, hey, there could be other possibilities there. All right, so
Yes.
now we talked about a lot of the woo stuff. I've got you on here, your extensive knowledge. I want to broaden my own understanding of what do they eat, because the first we had the Monroe, so we had a Monroe monster sighting here in Monroe, Michigan, 1965. Okay, well, we just had another recent sighting. You may have heard of this. A gentleman and his son, they were bow fishing out here in Monroe, Michigan, which is down by the Ohio border, and a Sasquatch jumped out of a tree and then ran off, and their dog chased it off. They said it ran so fast its legs were like a blur. Okay, well, with that said, I want to know from a practical level, what's their food sources? Because that's Matt Moneymaker had chimed in from the BFRO and had mentioned that they eat cattails. I didn't know that. So I knew they eat fish. I know they eat deer. I know they favor like peaches and apples. So cattails was something new that I learned. What are some of the other things that they may eat, when they're foraging?
There's something to be said about our plants, our native plants, the apothecary that goes behind that, the medicinal values, the protein values, the edible values. There's a lot in our wild and edibles. Personally, here in Massachusetts, here's my example. We have the moose. The moose will grow to 1,200 pounds and better. It will grow a big old rack every single year and then lose that rack every single year, sustain its weight from 1,000 to 1,200 pounds to 800 pounds and maintain a winter weight eating grasses, bark, and buds of trees in the winter up here. That's it. They don't chase down deer. They don't chase wild turkey. They don't fish. They don't hunt. They don't eat meat of any other sorts. And it's today our biggest land mammal in Northern America. So the moose is a good example of how a Bigfoot, potentially 8 to 1,200 pounds, could potentially exist. A lot of people put it in the gorilla family, and that kind of a thing, because it's a big, tall, hairy thing. I don't know if that's the case, but I can tell you that most of the wild animals that we have in America are wild and edible. They will eat wild and edibles. They'll eat plants. And when they're fortunate enough to bring down a deer, they do. But they'll graze and pick along the way and nibble on grasses, just like bears. Bears will have 40 pounds of sedges in them and fill up before they even chase down a deer. They'll eat more grasses. So the thought that they need to run down and have this high protein count, I believe they do. The mass, the creature or force people that big have to have some sort of balance to keep their balance of keeping you going during winter. Your body has to produce heat and still keep you alive and perform and make rational thought and function and these things. Earlier I was saying that we believe here in Massachusetts that these things are seen more from the spring to the first snow, to up to the winter time. You don't get many reports of them in the winter. I personally think they hibernate like our bears. I don't think they travel down south and go chill. I don't think that. I think they are able to hibernate, or if it's the woos involved, maybe they're off somewhere else. I have no idea. Going back to flesh and blood and planetary, something making foot tracks, I believe that they would probably, because if they were hunting a lot, they would be harder hunting in the winter, up here in the winter. There's less camouflage, there's things like that. They could probably throw rocks and nail stuff and kill stuff pretty good. I'm going to give them that. Ernie Davro will tell you he saw one, ripping apart deer, during his hunt. So do they eat deer? Absolutely. I'm not going to say they don't, and they don't hunt it actively. That is probably something they do. They might work symbiotic with with the wolves or coyotes or other things like that as well. Because other creatures do that. They work symbiotically, maybe unknowingly, the crows are going to get a benefit from a kill. And so they're going to work. And then maybe the crow's over here telling them where this thing is. And so they go over here and, oh, there's food, or, there's things like that happen in the Bigfoot world. So I don't know. I think it's one of those things that they don't need to chase around a lot of food. I think they maintain their food through bark and buds and grasses, all the fixins they can find on farms and streams and whatever else they can get. We've got reports from dumpster diving, literally feet out of the dumpster, legs out of a dumpster, and this thing coming out with a bag and running. Yeah, literally dumpster diving. So from country settings in a dumpster, cheese factory. I'm not going to give it away, but yeah, stuff like that. So I think they're opportunists, just like a bear. I think they'll eat the whole can of tuna, including the can. And I think a Bigfoot would do that. I think probably the same mannerisms. If a bear breaks into your cabin and leaves, it's not going to shut the door or clean up.
Fantastic, Tim. Well, we crossed the hour mark. I always keep my episodes to an hour. I keep it simple. Tim, I really want to thank you for being willing to go to the woo side, but yet also we have to deal with the physical, biological creature as well, because without human eyewitnesses and without the physical evidence of footprints and whether it be scat and sightings of a biological creature, we don't have any stories about Bigfoot. So I want to thank you, Tim, for being able to go to the extremes with our conversation today. With that said, Tim, where can people get a hold of you? How can they follow you, contact you?
You can find us at the Vogel Brothers Facebook page, the Vogel Brothers Facebook page. And then there's our business called the Cobble Mountain Critter Project, which also does Bigfoot research and youth outdoor education. And that has a page. And that would be great to go in there and follow that. You can, maybe even help support with some of the fundraising we do. We do a Cobble Mountain Critter Festival. We did that last year. I think this year we're going to do a researchers rendezvous, getting people together collectively here at the camp and share ideas and information. So the Vogel Brothers or the Cobble Mountain Critter Project, and you can get us there.
Fantastic, Tim. I'm going to tell you right now, you're on my list, along with Ernie Davio, as people I want to meet in person. I
Get him
really
on your
do.
show.
Yeah,
Get Ernie on the show.
he's already been on here. That's how I heard
Oh.
about the blue ones. Yeah, has he been on once or twice? So I'm so thankful too, because you kind of corroborate. It's neat to have a joining community so we corroborate each other, because the general public out there, many people still think this is just some big joke. And when you bring legitimate people together with legitimate sightings, we can kind of war against that and make some of our eyewitnesses feel better about themselves. But Tim, thanks so much for being on the show tonight. I'm going to go ahead and put you backstage and just hang out there, and I'll be there in a minute.
Okay. Thanks for having me.
Definitely, Tim. Thank you. Hey, everybody. That's it, man. Tim Vogel from the Cobble Mountain Critter Project. Find him on Facebook. The Vogel Brothers as well. They do this outreach called the Youth Outdoor Education. Just get a hold of Tim, find him, follow him, support him. I know I'm going to track him down, try to meet him in person, and go to one of his events, whether it's a speaking engagement or one of these get-togethers. That's my goal now. But to everyone at home, thanks for tuning in. And as always, stay tuned for another episode of the Bigfoots of America podcast show. We'll see you next time.